Hi, I'm Reverend Patricia Adams Farmer, pastor of Millersburg Christian Church, and my sermon for today during the coronavirus is called Every Hair on Your Head. It's based on Matthew chapter 10, verses 24 through 31. Today is Father's Day, and although my father is no longer living, I celebrate my memories of my dad on this day. He served in World War II, and for that I am proud. But I regret that he died suddenly at age 67 before I had a chance to really talk to him about his experiences. I only got bits and pieces, and there was so much more to tell. I knew enough, though, to know that my dad had seen horrors that he wanted to protect his children from. And maybe to offset that part of his life, he developed a sense of humor. He developed a tremendous sense of humor, and he loved to laugh. And sometimes when watching the old Jackie Gleason show called The Honeymooners, he would laugh so hard that he would almost fall out of his lounge chair. And some of my best memories, though, are times when I felt afraid and Dad was always there to console me. When I was really small, the Cold War was at its height. In 1962, at age 6, the Cuban Missile Crisis had everyone on edge, including my little town in Oklahoma. And I remember sitting in the back seat of our Oldsmobile station wagon with my older sisters and my little brother. And we were taking a Sunday drive, as people did back in those days. And I remember asking him from the back seat, "Dad, are we going to be bombed by the Russians?" He looked at me through the rearview mirror with that dad face of reassurance and said, "No, honey, we're not going to be bombed by the Russians." That was it. I was satisfied. I remember that moment with such clarity because I felt this weight just fall off my young shoulders as I had been carrying several pounds of fear around. I was a fearful child, and my dad was probably not surprised that I would be ruminating about getting bombed by the Russians while taking a Sunday drive. But, we are all fearful creatures. We really never completely grow out of that. From the moment we are born, we learn to fear the world around us, certainly to fear the stranger. Political leaders have long recognized the power of fear in ensuring our conformity to the structures of this world, even when doing so does not serve our best interests. Fear-mongering, the kind that sows division and hate, is our worst enemy. Fear is the driving force behind vast segments of our economy, as well as increasingly in our politics. Fear is sadly also the driving force behind many religious folks. Well, Jesus, what did he have to say about fear? Well, he wasn't a fan. He was not a fan of fear and said, "Do not fear," umpteen times in the New Testament. Well, in our passage in Matthew, he recognizes that fear is the undoing of discipleship. Discipleship takes a measure of courage. Jesus' disciples courageously left the security of their homes and families to follow him as they proclaimed God's love as expressed in Jesus. But even they ultimately bowed before the power of fear. Fear is not something we can simply snap our fingers and get rid of like magic. We have to walk alongside our fears and talk to them once in a while. But they will always be with us because we are human, and fear is a basic human emotion, an important emotion, meant to save us from lions and tigers and bears and other predators like the coronavirus. But sometimes fear controls us, and it gets distorted and is used as a weapon and makes us do terrible things. Bigotry in all of its forms is based on fear. So, if we cannot banish fear, how are we to live with fear? I like to think about fear as a companion on a road trip. Fear can ride along as we talk to it, but fear does not get to sit in the front seat or take over the road map or change the radio station. And most importantly, never give fear the keys to the car. Not if we want to avoid a wreck and wreck our entire lives. Well, when we follow Jesus, we will have enemies, just as Jesus did and his disciples. When we stand up for the marginalized, when we stand up for the victims of injustice, when we stand up for the victims of poverty, as so many are doing this weekend, we might indeed make some enemies for those who do not want change. So too, the Christian life takes courage. Sometimes the fear of the unknown causes us to cling to the familiar at all costs. There is an old story about the man who had committed a crime, and he was sent to the king for his punishment. The king told him he had two choices of punishment. He could be placed in chains and sent to the dungeon, or he said, pointing to the door behind the man, "You can take what's behind that big, dark, scary, mysterious iron door." Well, the criminal quickly decided on the dungeon option. As the king's men secured him in chains and began to take him to the dungeon, he turned back to the king and asked, "By the way, out of curiosity, what's behind that door?" The king laughed and said, "It's funny. I offer everyone the same choice, and nearly everyone picks the dungeon." "So," said the criminal, "tell me what's behind the door." The king paused and then answered, "Freedom. Freedom is behind that door." But it seems most people are so afraid of the unknown that they immediately choose to be chained to the dungeon. Alan Watts put it best when he said, "Our lives are one long effort to resist the unknown." But of course, we do know something that is behind that door of the unknown. Yes, there is one thing we know that will be on the other side of that big, dark, scary door. Jesus gave us a strong hint when he said, Are not two sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground, apart from your Father. And even the hairs on your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. We are loved that much. So much that God numbers the hairs on our head. And God loves the sparrow too. So much that when one of them falls to the ground, God is there. How much more valuable are we? Our heavenly companion, the risen Christ, the God who counts the hairs on our head, the God who loves sparrows, is with us, no matter what scary things we may encounter as we try to live the life of love and justice. Whether we are choosing to step out into a new vocation or to change the world with our voices and protest against injustice and poverty, or risk love and friendship, whatever we're scared of, we know that we never go through that big, dark, scary, mysterious door alone. On the other side, we are met by the one who calls us to adventure and fresh beginnings, and ultimately, to death itself, that greatest and most mysterious adventure of all. Let us not be afraid to follow Jesus, the way of love, the way of justice, the way of peace, the way of eternal joy. Amen.